I'm Jiang Ming from University of Texas at Arlington. The topic of my presentation is BinSim, trace-based semantic binary diffing or system call-sliced segment equivalence checking. This is joint work with Dongpeng, Yufei, and Dinghao from Penn State. This talk is about a hybrid method to identify the fine-grained relations between two obfuscated binary code. Compared to the previous work, our approach has two unique features. We are able to identify the very common block-centric limitations that we can capture the similarities or differences that can go across base block boundaries. And we can also identify two binary codes behaviors are conditional equivalent. Before I go into more details, I will first introduce our background and the motivation of our approach. Many security-relevant software analysis works on binary code instead of source code. So why binary code analysis is very attractive in security? First, in many cases, we do not have access to the source code of the application we want to analyze. For example, large-scale the malicious binary code, commercial off-the-shelf software, and firmware. Binary code is the only available resource to be analyzed. Second, binary code analysis can provide ground truth about the program behaviors because computers execute the binaries, not source code. And one direction of security analysis for binary code is to detect the difference between two binary code. We call it binary diffing. The binary diffing technique is first derived from the patch analysis. For example, we compare two binary code, one is patched, another one is not patched. We can find which part of code has been modified or patched. And the binary diffing technique has been applied in many other important security analysis tasks. For example, the difference between the binary code and its patched version can reveal the important information about the vulnerabilities just fixed. And attackers can utilize this information and quickly generate a so-called one-day exploit. And the difference between for example, the intellectual property protected binary code and the suspicious binary code indicates a very possible case for the software plagiarism. So that binary diffing analysis can also apply to detect the binary software plagiarism. And very important application for binary diffing is in the malware analysis, because we have received many of the malware samples every day, and many of them are actually not brand new. They just different versions, different variant, or different just small modifications to the original one. If we can identify the fine-grained relations between malware variants, we can understand many important information from the malicious binary code. For example, we can know whether these two malware samples belong to the same family. We can even know whether they are from the same malware authors, or even whether they have showing the same vulnerability. However, the big challenge for the binary code analysis, also a big challenge for the binary difference analysis, is the pervasive code obfuscations, because malware authors are always trying to apply various obfuscation schemas to hide their signature of binary code and to make the binary code look very different from the original one. For example, the malware also can apply packers, polymorphism, metamorphism, and code virtualizations to impede the malware detections. And these pervasive code obfuscation techniques have already driven the binary diffing techniques towards detecting the semantic difference instead of syntactic difference. That means even if two codes show some difference in terms of different instructions, different bytecode n-grams, even different control flow graph, the semantic-based binary diffing want to identify they are still similar. Okay. The current semantic-based binary diffing can be classified into two categories. The first one is to compare runtime execution behaviors rather than the instruction bytes. Because the dynamic analysis has a good resilience against the code obfuscation, there have been a lot of work to measure the similarities of program behavior features. For example, they try to measure similarities between system call sequence or system call dependencies graphs. However, the limitation of this kind of approach is that many binary code differences do not reflect on the behavioral changes. And also, this kind of detection may overlook some conditional equivalent behaviors. For example, here is the example is just two different versions of children malware samples. The new version only performs the malicious behavior when trigger condition is satisfied. If the dynamic only approach happened to satisfy this condition and capture all the behavior, they will treat these two binary variants as equivalent. However, the new variant only conditional equivalent to the previous one under the if the precondition is satisfied. And the second category of this semantic binary diffing is to compare the semantics of two pieces of binary code, which is usually based on the base block semantics modeling. At a high level, it uses symbolic execution to represent the input-output relations of a base block as a set of symbolic formulas. And the equivalence of symbolic formulas can be further verified either through, for example, constraint solver or matched through random sampling or hashing. Here, I want to explain more about why this semantic modeling approach is typically limited in the scope of a base block. For example, first, to perform the symbolic execution on the larger scope, for example, function has several challenges. First, identify the scope of function in the obfuscated binary code is very challenging. And there are many of obfuscation methods try to hide the scope information of the functions. But for the base block, it's because it's a string-line code with one entry and one exit, no branches. It's very easy to identify the scope of the base block. Second, the symbolic execution itself is very expensive. If we perform symbolic execution on a very large scope, for example, function, it's more introduce the performance, large performance overhead. And this base block semantic modeling approach are very effective to defeat the obfuscation method that perform within the base block scope. For example, the register swapping, instruction reordering, and some such kind of Jiang code. All such kind of obfuscation if their scope is in the base block. The currently base block semantic modeling approach already can defeat this kind of obfuscation. However, all these approaches share a common limitation, or call it block-centric limitations. That means they are insufficient to capture the similarities or differences that go across of base block boundary. Next, I will show a real example to show how this base block semantics modeling works and the block-centric limitation. Here is the two base block of binary code. And for this two base block, there are only two exactly same instructions. And we want to figure out whether these two base blocks are semantically equivalent. For the semantic-based approach, they will represent the input to the base block as a symbolic formula and perform the symbolic execution to summarize the input-output relations of the base block. The output is a set of the symbolic formulas. These formulas, because it's already summarized the semantics of the base block. And after that, we can apply, for example, constraint solver to verify whether these symbolic formulas are equivalent or other like dynamic testing approaches. Here I will show an example to demonstrate the block-centric limitation. Here is the example of three different implementations of a very simple algorithm. This algorithm to count an integer, the number of bits in the integer numbers. There was totally three implementations. And the first two implementations show different loop bodies, and the last implementations even do not have the loop body. They just only use the bitwise operations. They can achieve the same goal. Of course, these three implementations are exactly the same. They are given the same input, they can produce the same output. And if we say their control flow graph generated from the binary code, The highlighted part is corresponding to the main part of the loop bodies. Unfortunately, all these block-centric binary diffing methods cannot match these three cases because if we compare this highlight parts, they show different semantics. And in our papers, we also summarize other obfuscations that can contribute to block-centric limitations. For example, the common compiler optimization approach, such as loop unrolling and function inline, they will merge the because they will eliminate the branch instructions. They will usually merge the multiple base blocks into one simple base block. And also for the return-oriented programming obfuscation, they will produce a chain of the small base blocks to connect this ROP gadget. And also, just like the bit count algorithm, they have different implementations for the same algorithms. And for the more examples, we can find the book called The Hacker's Delight. This book is a collection of the programming optimization tricks with only bitwise operations. Basically, we can find almost all these common arithmetic algorithms, but only with bitwise operations in these books. So the binary code compared with this optimization version show very different base block features with the original design. And there are another two more complicated cases: control flow obfuscation, for example, opaque predicate and control flow flatten. They will divide the simple base block into multiple base blocks because they will insert new conditional branch instructions. And a more complicated case is called virtualization obfuscation. Virtualization obfuscation will replace the original instructions into a set of bytecode and simulate this bytecode during execution through a decode dispatch loop. The result of this kind of decode dispatch loop will generate a sequence of base block to simulate one x86 instructions. Here I have summarized the major difficulties that can lead to the block-centric limitations. And the previous semantic-based method usually cannot handle this obfuscation because they will, change. This kind of obfuscation will lead to this, for example, the similarities or differences that go across the base block boundary. Okay, let's look at the overview of our BinSim approach. Our BinSim is a hybrid method. We combine this the dynamic approach and the semantic modeling. And the purpose is to address the limitations of existing binary diffing approaches. Our approach identifies the fine-grained relations between obfuscated binary code. BinSim leverages a novel concept we call it system call slice segment and their equivalence checking. The high-level idea is we rely on system call to slice out the related instructions that contribute to the value of a system call argument by following the control and the data dependencies. And we will extract this instruction segment. After that, we will apply symbolic execution and constraint solver to compare this, to check the equivalence of this system call slice segment. This is a high-level idea of our BinSim approaches. And because our BinSim combines dynamic analysis and semantic modeling approaches, so we can address the limitation of this currently approach. For example, first, we can answer whether to match the system calls are conditional equivalent because our slice segment will consider both the control flow and the data flow relationship, so we can exactly know whether these two system calls are equivalent under some particular condition is satisfied. And second, this system call slice segment usually bypass the boundary of the base block, so we are more likely to address the block-centric limitations. So the core method of BinSim contains 5 steps. The first steps, given two programs, P and P prime, we will perform dynamic analysis, collect their interaction trace log, and also system call sequence. First, we will perform the system call alignment to align the system calls. This alignment will provide our starting point for our following steps, and also this system call alignment can fill out many of the cases that show very different behaviors. And starting from the aligned system calls, we'll do this dynamic slicing on the instructions, and also we perform symbolic execution. In particular, actually, we calculate the weakest precondition that can make the execution reach the argument of system call. Here I have to mention that very common challenge to this symbolic execution on the binary code is cryptographic function. Because the cryptographic function shows very complicated arithmetic operations. If we perform symbolic execution on the cryptographic algorithm, it will produce very large the formula size and will complicate our slice, the further the symbolic formula comparisons. So here our approach to work around this challenge is we perform such kind of quickly identification of the cryptographic function that we identify whether this kind of code shows some very unique features of crypto functions, and we will terminate symbolic execution on these crypto functions. That means we do not perform this weakest precondition on the implementation of crypto functions. Instead, we will do some approximate matching to quickly find the similarities of crypto functions. For other weakest precondition, we will apply the concurrent solver to find whether they are equivalent or not. And here is the architecture of the BinSim, which contains the major two parts. On the online part, we execute the two memory code in our sandbox. We will record the execution log, which contains, for example, the instruction log, memory log, and system call sequence. And in addition, we want to compare the instructions from the real memory payload, not from the unpack routine, so that we also develop a generic unpacking that will start our approach when the unpacking is finished. And the output of the online part will pass to our offline analysis. First, we have to do some pre-processing. For example, we will do the system call alignment, and we will transfer the instruction sequence to the intermediate language. The purpose of this intermediate language is will make our following step very easy. For example, we can quickly identify some corner case of the implicit control flow dependencies, which I will discuss later. And we also will detect the existence of crypto functions. If we identify the cryptographic function, we will terminate this symbolic execution, and we still perform this segment sequence equivalence checker for the other slice. The output of BinSim is the similarity score, which to show the how these two binary codes are similar or not. So here I will show some technical depths of our approach. For the system call alignment, we rely on a CSS15 approach, which is very advanced bioinformatic-inspired approach to perform system call sequence alignment. And based on that approach, we do some additional work to remove the system call noise, because a very common attack to all this system call comparison is attackers can add many of the noise, irrelevant system calls to complicated these comparisons. Our approach is we perform multi-tag technical analysis to trace the control dependency between the system calls, because for the attackers, it's very difficult to manipulate the dependency between the system calls. And in addition, actually, we also consider the parameter semantics. For example, here is we show the fake dependencies that, for example, the XOR EX, and this is the value of EX will pass to NT close. The parameter of NT close is the integer. However, we also consider the parameters semantics that we know the parameter of NT close should point to some device that already opened and not from some constant value, so that we can fill out these fake dependencies. And here we spend a lot of effort to solve the dynamic slicing on the binary code. Compared to the source code slicing, dynamic slicing on the obfuscated binaries is never a textbook problem. There are a lot of corner case traps or tricks. For example, usually we access the value is through the indirect memory access. The real value is calculated through indirect access from register. So when we trace the data flow from this memory access, usually it's two ways. We can trace the data flow either from the index or either from the value that's read from the memory slot. And we found that depends the different scenarios, we have to choose a different approach. And in our paper, we have already discussed these two cases. And also, in addition to the explicit control transfers, there are, for the x86, there are a lot of implicit control transfer instructions. If we want to trace the control flow, we have to consider all these implicit control transfers. And furthermore, the decode dispatch loop of virtualization obfuscation will generate a lot of fake dependencies, because all this simulated code is the control dependency on the decode dispatch loop. So our approach is we split data dependencies and control dependencies, and for the data dependencies, we perform the index-based slicing and value-based slicing, and in our paper we discuss how to choose these two different kinds of slicing according to the different scenarios. And we also tracking the explicit control dependencies, and based on this result, we further remove the fake control dependency caused by the virtualization obfuscation. And for another challenge I have mentioned that to handle the cryptographic functions, because it's very common in the malware analysis. Many malware, for example, ransomware, they apply many of the cryptographic algorithm. Here, our approach is we first observe that almost all of these cryptographic functions have no interactions with system calls, so that our approach is inspired by the CCS10's work that we do a stitched symbolic execution. That we first identify the scope of the possible cryptographic function implementation, and we will compare their similarity with some approximate ways. So we do not perform this use the symbolic execution and the symbol prover to verify their equivalence. Okay, here we quickly summarize our evaluation result. We compare other six the binary diffing tools. Two of them are from industry. They mainly evaluate syntactic difference, and two of them is the block-centric approach, and another two is the semantic, is dynamic ordering approaches. And to evaluate the result, we generate some ground truth data set which contains the obfuscation only in the base block, and other obfuscation that can lead to the block-centric limitations. And here I summarize our result is we do this compare evaluation among these 6 tools, and we found that only BinSim can find that we can accurately different the obfuscation pairs from wrong pairs. That means our approach can show very small the similarity difference between right pairs and obfuscation pairs, and also show very high similarity score from the right pairs and the wrong pairs, so that we can directly draw a line to differentiate these 2 cases. Just one slide. And we also analyze a large number of wide malware that we collected in the February 2017. And here we want to show that in practice, this conditional equivalent malware is very common. It's very common. For example, 11% of malware variants are conditional equivalent, but the dynamic only approach cannot detect this kind of things. And another one distinct example is we find a variant of crypto war, very famous ransomware. It will terminate the execution if the infected machine's UI language are from the former sovereign union country language. That means the attackers want to exclude these countries from attacker. So our BinSim can find this 2 different crypto war variant shows some this kind of conditional equivalent behaviors. And here is some limitation of the BinSim. Basically, BinSim shares the common limitation of the dynamic approach. We can only detect the similarities or differences that only XP the during execution. Okay, thank you for taking time to listen to this presentation. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much. Do we have some questions? Could you please step up to the microphone?
Nathan Downhun from Penn. Cool work. I know it's not in your threat model, but I'm wondering what you think about malware that detects the fact that they're running in TMU or something like this and modifies their semantic behavior.
Yeah, I think it's very good questions, and this is exactly the limitation of approach. For this environment sensitive malware, they try to detect this sandbox we are running. We cannot analyze this kind of case. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? In that case, thank you very much,
thank you.
speaker.
Thank you.